The mating ceremony was supposed to be the beginning of her life. Instead, it became the end of everything Seren had dared to believe. She had stood among the unmated women of Valdoria, her heart pounding with a secret she could share with no one. For 3 months, she had slipped into the Alpha King's chambers under cover of darkness. 3 months of whispered confessions, tangled limbs, and a connection so fierce it had left marks on her soul. He had never seen her face clearly in those shadows, but he had taught her body, her voice, her scent. She had been foolish enough to believe that would be enough. Tonight, he would choose his queen before the entire kingdom. And Seren carried his heirs in her womb. Twins. The royal healer had confirmed it just days ago. 2 heartbeats fluttering beneath her own. So when Alpha King Theron strode into the great hall, power radiating from him like heat from a flame, Seren allowed herself to hope. He would send her. He would know. He would choose her. But he walked directly past her without a glance, and stopped in front of her sister. "I choose Cassia," he announced. The hall erupted in cheers. Seren felt the ground tilt beneath her feet, felt her heart crack straight down the center. Her sister's smile was radiant, triumphant. Her sister, who had stolen everything from her since the day they were born. By dawn, Seren was gone. She took nothing but the clothes on her back and the 2 lives growing inside her. The Alpha King would never know what he had lost. He would never know the children who would bear his bloodline. He thought he had gained a queen that night. He had no idea he had lost everything. 3 months earlier, Seren had never intended to fall in love with a king. The palace of Valdoria rose from the cliffs like a crown of black stone, its towers piercing clouds that never seemed to clear. Seren had lived within its walls her entire life, not as nobility, but as a shadow. The illegitimate daughter of Lord Harwin and a servant who had died bringing her into the world. There had been whispers once, quickly silenced, about strange light filling the birthing chamber that night. About her mother being more than she seemed. But Lord Harwin had forbidden such talk, and eventually, the whispers faded. All that remained was Seren. Tolerated, never wanted. Her half-sister Cassia was everything Seren was not. Golden-haired where Seren was dark. Celebrated where Seren was ignored. Cassia had been raised as the legitimate heir, groomed for an advantageous marriage, dressed in silks while Seren wore her cast-offs. But none of that had mattered when Seren first stumbled into the king's private library. She had been hiding from one of Cassia's cruel games, a hunt through the palace where Seren was always the prey. The library had seemed empty, lit only by dying firelight. She had pressed herself into an alcove behind a tapestry, trying to quiet her ragged breathing. That was when she heard him. "You can come out," a deep voice said. "I can smell your fear from across the room." Seren's blood had frozen. She knew that voice. Everyone in Valdoria knew that voice. Alpha King Theron had ruled these lands for 12 years since the death of his father. He was said to be cold, calculating, utterly without mercy. She should have run. Instead, she stepped out from behind the tapestry. The king sat in a leather chair by the fire, a book open in his lap. In the dim light, she could barely make out his features, just the sharp angle of his jaw, the pale gleam of his eyes watching her with unsettling focus. "You're Lord Harwin's bastard," he said, not a question. "Yes, Your Majesty." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Why are you hiding in my library?" She should have lied, should have made up some excuse about getting lost, about cleaning, about anything other than the truth. But something in the darkness, in his voice, made her reckless. "My sister's friends find it amusing to hunt me through the palace," she said. "I needed somewhere they wouldn't look." A long pause. Then, impossibly, the king laughed. It was a low sound, rusty, as if he hadn't used it in years. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "They won't find you here." She should have refused, should have remembered her place. But Seren had spent 19 years being invisible, and for the first time, someone was actually seeing her. She sat. They talked until dawn painted the windows gray. He asked her questions no one had ever bothered to ask, about her thoughts, her dreams, the books she read when she could steal time in forgotten corners of the palace. She learned that he despised politics, that he found most nobles insufferable, that he retreated to this library because it was the only place he could breathe. When she finally rose to leave, he caught her wrist. "Come back tomorrow night," he said. It wasn't a request. She came back. And the night after that. And the night after that. Somewhere between the second week and the third, the conversations became something else. A brush of fingers that lasted too long, a gaze that dropped to her lips. The air between them growing thick with something neither of them named. It was Seren who closed the distance first. She would remember that forever, the way she had risen from her chair, crossed to where he sat, and pressed her mouth to his before her courage could fail. He had frozen for one terrible heartbeat. Then his hands were in her hair, pulling her into his lap, and he was kissing her like a man drowning. "We shouldn't," he rasped against her throat. "I know," she breathed back. They did anyway. Night after night she came to him in darkness. He never lit more than a single candle, and even that he kept far from where they tangled together on the library floor, or the leather couch, eventually his bed in the chambers beyond. She learned the landscape of his body in shadows, the scars on his ribs, the way he shuddered when she kissed the curve of his neck. "I'll choose you," he whispered one night, his hand spread across her bare stomach. "At the ceremony, I'll make you my queen." Seren's heart had soared so high she thought it might never come down. She should have known that anything that flew so high was destined to fall. The night of the mating ceremony, the great hall blazed with 1,000 candles. Seren stood among the unmated women of noble blood, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had dressed carefully in her finest gown, deep green velvet that Cassia had discarded last season. Her dark hair was braided with silver threads, and her only adornment a simple pendant that had belonged to her mother. Beside her, the other women preened and whispered. They came from every corner of Valdoria, daughters of lords and generals, each hoping to catch the king's eye. None of them knew what Seren knew. None of them had spent the past 3 months in his bed, and none of them carried his children. Seren pressed a hand to her stomach, still flat beneath the velvet. The healer had confirmed the pregnancy just 4 days ago. "Twins," she had said, her weathered face creasing with rare surprise. A blessing from the moon goddess herself. Seren had wept with joy, then terror, then joy again. She hadn't told Theron yet. She wanted to wait until after the ceremony, until after he had chosen her publicly. Then she would share the news, and their happiness would be complete. The great doors swung open. Alpha King Theron entered, and the hall fell silent. He was devastating in formal black, his silver-gray hair brushed back from a face that could have been carved from marble. His eyes swept the assembly with cold assessment, revealing nothing. This was the king the kingdom knew, the ruthless ruler, the wolf without mercy. But Seren knew the man beneath. She had felt him tremble in her arms. She had heard him laugh in the darkness. He would choose her. She was certain of it. Theron began to walk the line of women. He paused before each one, inhaling their scent, studying their faces. Some he dismissed immediately. Others received a longer look before he moved on. Seren's pulse quickened as he drew closer. 10 women away. 5. 3. He was almost to her. She could smell him now. Pine and wood smoke and something wilder beneath. The scent she had come to know as intimately as her own. Theron stopped directly in front of her. Seren looked up, her lips parting, ready to smile, ready to see recognition in his eyes. But his gaze passed over her like she was furniture. He didn't stop, didn't pause, didn't even seem to register her presence. He walked past her and stopped in front of Cassia. The world went silent. Or perhaps that was just Seren's heart stopping. Cassia stood one position to Seren's left, radiant in a gown of pale gold that matched her hair. Her smile was demure, practiced, and perfect. Everything about her was perfect. Theron inhaled deeply. Something flickered across his face, an expression Seren couldn't read. "I choose Cassia," he announced, "daughter of Lord Harwin. My queen." Cheers exploded through the hall. Cassia's eyes glittered with triumph as Theron took her hand, as he raised it to his lips, as he led her to the dais where the priest waited to begin the binding ceremony. Seren couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. He knew her scent. He had memorized every inch of her body. He had whispered promises in the dark, had said he would choose her, had said, but he was looking at Cassia the way he had looked at her. And Cassia was looking back with the smile of a woman who had won. The ceremony began. Words were spoken. Vows exchanged. Seren watched it all from somewhere outside her body, numb, frozen, unable to process what was unfolding before her. Her sister. He had chosen her sister. Then Cassia's gaze found her in the crowd, and Seren saw something there that turned her blood to ice. Knowledge. Cassia knew. Somehow, impossibly, Cassia knew about Seren and the king. And this, all of this, was deliberate. The ceremony ended. The new queen was presented. The crowd surged forward to offer congratulations. Seren slipped away. She made it to her chambers before the first sob tore from her throat. She pressed both hands to her stomach, to the lives growing inside her, and wept until no tears remained. She couldn't stay. If Cassia knew about the affair, she would eventually learn about the pregnancy. And Cassia had never tolerated competition for anything. Her children would never be safe here. Seren rose. She wiped her face. She gathered the few coins she had hidden away. A spare dress, a cloak. Then she walked out of the palace and into the night. One hand pressed to her belly where the heirs of Valdoria slumbered, unaware that they had already been cast out before they were born. Behind her, the celebration roared on. No one noticed she was gone. By morning, Seren had crossed the border into the wildlands. She walked until her feet bled, then walked further. The road was rough, the spring air still edged with winter's chill, but she didn't dare stop. Every passing rider made her flinch. Every howl in the distance made her heart seize. She expected pursuit. Surely someone had noticed her absence by now. Surely Theron would realize his mistake, would send riders to find her, would... But no one came. Days passed. Then weeks. Seren traded her mother's pendant for a seat on a merchant's wagon heading south. She told him she was a widow seeking family in distant provinces. He didn't ask questions. People rarely did when the answers might be inconvenient. The wagon took her through 3 territories before she finally stepped off in a village so small it didn't appear on any map. Thornwick, the locals called it, a cluster of stone cottages nestled in a valley between 2 mountains, far from any main road, forgotten by the rest of the world. Perfect. Seren used her remaining coins to rent a room above the blacksmith's shop. She told everyone she was a widow named Bryn, that her husband had died in a border skirmish, that she had nowhere else to go. The village accepted her without question. They were simple people, farmers and craftsmen, too busy surviving to pry into a stranger's past. The blacksmith's wife, a kind woman named Hetty, brought her soup when the morning sickness grew too severe to hide. The village healer checked on her as the pregnancy progressed, and when the twins came on a stormy autumn night, screaming their arrival into a world that didn't know they existed, Seren held them and wept. A boy and a girl, Ash and Ren. Ash had his father's pale gray eyes, the color of winter storms. Ren had his stubborn jaw. Looking at them was a knife to the heart, a constant reminder of what she had lost and what she was protecting. She told no one who their father was. As far as Thornwick knew, they were the children of a dead soldier. Nothing more. 3 years passed. Seren built a life in the shadows. She took work as a seamstress, her fingers quick and her stitches neat. She raised her children in the small cottage she eventually purchased with her savings. She watched them grow from squalling infants to curious toddlers who chased chickens through the village square and demanded stories every night before bed. Ash was serious, watchful, already showing signs of the alpha strength that ran in his blood. Ren was wild and fearless, climbing trees before she could properly run, laughing at everything. They were her whole world, her reason for breathing. And not a day passed that Seren didn't fear losing them. She scanned every stranger who passed through Thornwick. She kept her ears sharp for news from Valdoria, catching fragments from traveling merchants. The Alpha King and his queen had yet to produce an heir, they said. Rumors swirled of tension in the palace. Some whispered that the queen was barren. Seren told herself it didn't matter. That chapter of her life was closed. Theron had made his choice, and she had made hers. But sometimes, late at night when the children were sleeping, she would sit by the fire and remember. The warmth of his hands, the rumble of his laugh. The way he had looked at her in the darkness as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. Had any of it been real? Or had she been nothing but a convenient distraction? She never found an answer. The stranger arrived on a gray autumn morning. Seren was hanging laundry behind her cottage when she first noticed him. He stood at the edge of the village square, dressed in traveling clothes that were too fine for a common merchant. His eyes swept the small cottages, the muddy paths, the villagers going about their business. Then his gaze landed on the children. Ash and Ren were playing near the well, stacking stones into a precarious tower. Ash's distinctive pale gaze caught the morning light as he laughed at something his sister said. Ren's dark hair tumbled wild around her face, the same shade as Seren's own. The stranger went very still. Seren's blood turned to ice. She abandoned the laundry and strode toward her children, positioning herself between them and the stranger's gaze. Her heart pounded. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, hackles rising with protective fury. "Can I help you?" she called out, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. The stranger's head turned. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a soldier's bearing and a scar across his left cheekbone. "Just passing through," he said. His accent marked him as northern, Valdorian. "The inn is at the other end of the village," Seren said flatly. "They can help you with whatever you need." The stranger's gaze flickered to the children again, lingering on Ash's distinctive eyes. Something shifted in his expression. "Lovely children," he said. "Their father must be proud." "Their father is dead," Seren replied without blinking. A long pause. The stranger inclined his head, a gesture that felt too formal for a simple traveler. "My condolences," he said. Then he turned and walked toward the inn. Seren didn't relax until he was out of sight. Even then, she gathered the children quickly, ushering them inside the cottage, bolting the door behind her. That night, after Ash and Ren were asleep, she sat by the window and watched the inn at the edge of the village. The stranger's window glowed with candlelight until well past midnight. He wasn't just passing through, he was searching for something, or someone. Seren pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race beneath her palm. 3 years of hiding, 3 years of building a life from nothing. And now it was all about to come crashing down. She had always known this day would come. She had just hoped she would have more time. The stranger left Thornwick 3 days later. Seren watched him go from behind her curtain, her children safely tucked away at Hetty's cottage under the pretense of helping with baking. Only when the stranger's horse disappeared over the northern ridge did she allow herself to breathe. But relief lasted only a moment. He had been asking questions. The innkeeper's daughter had told Seren as much when she came to pick up mended linens. The stranger had inquired about newcomers to the village, about young widows, about children with unusual coloring. He knew. Or at least, he suspected. That night, Seren began to pack. She would take the children south, across the mountains into territories where Valdoria held no sway. She would change their names again, find another forgotten village, and build another life from nothing. She had done it once. She could do it again. But when she looked at Ash and Ren sleeping peacefully in their small beds, their faces soft with dreams, something cracked inside her. They had friends here. A home. Ash was finally learning to read with the village teacher. Ren had named every chicken in the blacksmith's yard. How many times could she uproot them before it broke something that couldn't be mended? Seren sat down heavily, pressing her palms to her eyes. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe the stranger had been exactly what he claimed, a traveler passing through, curious about a small village and nothing more. Maybe she was seeing threats in shadows. She decided to wait. 1 more week. If nothing happened, she would let herself believe they were safe. 6 days later, he came. Seren was kneading bread in her small kitchen when she felt it. A presence so powerful it made her wolf surge to the surface, hackles raised, teeth bared. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against her skin like a physical weight. She knew that presence. She had felt it 100 times in darkened rooms, wrapped around her like armor, like possession, like love. Her hands stilled in the dough. "Mama!" Ren looked up from the wooden blocks she was stacking. "What's wrong?" Seren couldn't answer. Her throat had closed entirely. Outside, footsteps approached. Heavy. Measured. Stopping directly before her door. 3 knocks. Each one resonated through her bones like a death knell. "Ash," Seren managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Take your sister to the back room, close the door. Don't come out until I call for you." Ash's eyes widened with understanding beyond his years. He grabbed Ren's hand and pulled her away without argument. Seren wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron. She took a breath that did nothing to steady her racing heart. Then she opened the door. Alpha King Theron stood on her threshold. He was exactly as she remembered and nothing like she remembered. The same sharp features, in the same powerful build, the same silver-gray hair that fell across his forehead. But there were shadows beneath his eyes now, hollows in his cheeks that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in years. His gaze swept over her face, and something fractured in his expression. Recognition. Disbelief. A pain so raw it made her flinch. "Seren," he breathed. Just her name. Nothing more. But the way he said it carried the weight of 3 years of searching, of questions without answers, of a wound that had never healed. Seren's hand tightened on the doorframe. "Your Majesty," she said, and watched him flinch at the formality. "You shouldn't be here." "Where else should I be?" His voice was rough, scraped. "I've looked for you for 3 years. 3 years, Seren. I thought you were dead. I thought someone had taken you. I've sent men to every corner of the kingdom, searched every village, every town. And yet you never thought to look in the one place you'd never expect a noble woman to hide." Seren's laugh was bitter. A forgotten village at the edge of nowhere. Theron's jaw tightened. "Why did you run?" The question hung between them like a blade. "You know why?" "No." He took a step forward, and Seren took one back. "I don't. I woke up the morning after the ceremony, and you were gone. No note. No explanation. Nothing. The morning after..." Seren stared at him. "You married my sister. You stood before the kingdom and chose her over me. What explanation did you need?" Something flickered across Theron's face. Confusion, then dawning horror. "Chose her over?" He shook his head slowly. "Seren, what are you talking about? I didn't..." A small sound from the back of the cottage cut him off. Theron's head snapped toward it, his body going rigid. His nostrils flared as he inhaled deeply, and Seren watched his expression transform from confusion to something far more dangerous. "There are children here," he said slowly. "I can smell them. 2 of them. Seren's heart stopped. They're sent, Theron continued, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. It's familiar, like mine, but different. Like, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The back room door creaked open. Ash stood in the gap, one small hand still on the handle, his pale gray eyes fixed on the stranger who had invaded their home. Theron made a sound like he'd been stabbed. Papa? Ren's voice piped up from behind her brother. Mama? Is that man our papa? He has Ash's eyes. The world went very, very still. Theron turned to look at Seren, and she had never seen such devastation on a human face, such anguish, such terrible, terrible hope. Tell me, he rasped, tell me they're not mine. Seren lifted her chin. I can't, she said quietly. Because they are. For a long moment, no one moved. Theron stared at the children. The children stared at Theron. Seren stood between them, her body positioned like a shield, ready to defend her babies against the man who had fathered them. Then Ren broke free of her brother's grip and marched directly toward the Alpha King. Ren, no. Seren reached for her, but her daughter was already standing before Theron, small hands planted on her hips, dark hair wild around her face. Are you really our papa? Ren demanded. Mama said our papa died in a war. Theron lowered himself to one knee, bringing his face level with hers. This close, the resemblance was unmistakable. Ren had Seren's coloring, but the stubborn set of her jaw, the shape of her brows, the way she lifted her chin in challenge, all Theron. I'm not dead, Theron said, his voice unsteady. I didn't know where to find you. Why not? Ren pressed. You're supposed to be a king. Kings can find anyone. Something crumpled in Theron's expression. You're right, he admitted. I should have found you sooner. I'm sorry. Ren. Seren's voice was sharp. Come here, now. Ren turned, confusion clouding her features. But Mama, if he's our papa... Come, here. The command brooked no argument. Ren retreated to Seren's side, reaching up to grip her mother's skirt with both small fists. Ash remained in the doorway, silent and watchful, his gaze never leaving Theron. Theron rose slowly, his gaze moving from the children to Seren. The devastation had hardened into something else now, determination. And beneath it, a fury she could see him fighting to contain. You hid them from me, he said quietly. My own children. For 3 years. I protected them. From what? From their father? From their birthright? From the woman you married? Seren's voice could have cut glass. From the sister who has hated me since the day I was born. Do you think I ran for myself? Do you think I wanted to leave? Then why did you? Because you chose her. The words tore from Seren's throat before she could stop them. Years of pain, years of grief, years of questions she could never answer, all of it bursting free. You walked right past me. You looked through me like I didn't exist. And then you stood before everyone and announced that you were taking Cassia as your queen. Theron shook his head. That's not what happened. I was there. I watched you. I never chose Cassia. His voice rose, cracking on her sister's name. I would never have chosen her. I went to that ceremony intending to choose you. Only you. But when I walked the line, when I reached where you should have been standing, he stopped, swallowed hard. You weren't there, he finished. Your scent was wrong. Everything was wrong. The woman in your position, she smelled like you. Looked like you from a distance, but it wasn't you. I knew it wasn't you. Seren felt the blood drain from her face. What? I thought I was going mad. I thought maybe I'd imagined everything between us. Aim invented a connection that never existed. The woman before me claimed to be you. She called herself Seren. She said she'd been waiting for me. That's impossible. I was there. I was standing in my place. I watched you walk toward me, and then... Memory struck her like a blow. The moments before Theron entered the hall, Cassia appearing at her side, pressing a cup of wine into her hands, insisting she drink for courage. The strange heaviness that had followed, making her limbs sluggish, her thoughts slow. She drugged me, Seren breathed. Cassia drugged me and took my place in line. She used perfume to mimic my scent. The full horror of it washed over her. She told you she was me. Theron's expression confirmed everything. I didn't know until weeks later that something was wrong, he said hollowly. The woman I married, the woman I thought was you, she was nothing like the person I'd held in my arms. Cold where you were warm. Calculating where you were genuine. By the time I realized the truth, you were already gone. Why didn't you come after me immediately? Cassia told everyone you'd run off with a lover, that you'd been having an affair for months, that the shame of exposure had driven you away. His hands clenched at his sides. I didn't believe it. I knew it was a lie, but I had no proof, and she was already my queen, already bound to me by ceremony. I've spent 3 years trapped in a marriage with a woman I despise, searching for the one I actually wanted. Seren felt the room spinning around her. All this time. All these years of believing he had betrayed her. And the truth was so much worse. Cassia had stolen her identity, stolen her place, stolen the king she loved. The children, Theron said, his voice breaking. She doesn't know about them? No. I realized I was pregnant before the ceremony, but I never told anyone. When I left, I made sure no one could trace me. Theron closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. A son and a daughter, he whispered. I have a son and a daughter. Despite everything, despite the anger and the fear and the years of pain between them, Seren felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't the cold king who had seemingly discarded her. This was a man who had been deceived as thoroughly as she had. A man who had lost everything without ever knowing what he'd lost. Ash, she called softly. Come here. Her son emerged from the doorway, approaching with the cautious grace of a young wolf. He stopped beside his sister, both children now standing between their parents, looking up with wide eyes. This is your father, Seren said. The words cost her more than she could express. Alpha King Theron of Valdoria. Ash studied Theron for a long moment, those matching pale eyes taking his measure. Then he extended one small hand. Hello, he said solemnly. I'm Ash. This is Ren. She talks too much and she steals my toys, but you're not allowed to yell at her. That's my job. Theron dropped to his knees before his children, taking Ash's hand with infinite care. Hello, Ash, he managed. I promise I'll never yell at either of you. And I'm sorry. His voice shattered completely. I'm so sorry I wasn't here. Ren, never one to be left out, threw her arms around Theron's neck. That's okay, she declared. You're here now. Seren watched the Alpha King crumble in her daughter's embrace, watched his shoulders shake with silent sobs, watched 3 years of searching finally reach their end. And despite herself, despite everything, she felt the first fragile stirring of hope. Night fell over Thornwick, and the Alpha King remained in her cottage. His guards, a small unit of 4 men who had accompanied him on his search, had been dispatched to the inn with strict orders to speak to no one. As far as the village knew, they were simply traveling soldiers seeking shelter for the night. Seren prepared a simple dinner while Theron sat with the children. She listened to Ren's endless chatter, to Ash's quieter questions, to Theron's voice as he answered each one with patience she wouldn't have expected from the fearsome king of legend. Do you have a crown? Ren demanded. Several, actually. They're heavy and uncomfortable. Do you live in a castle? I do. It has 312 rooms. Can we visit? Seren's hand stilled over the cutting board. That, Theron said carefully, is something your mother and I need to discuss. After dinner, after the children had been bathed and dressed in night clothes, After stories had been told and kisses had been given, Seren tucked them into their small beds and closed the door gently behind her. Theron stood by the fire, staring into the flames. The glow carved his features into sharp relief, catching the silver in his hair, the shadows beneath his eyes. He looked exhausted. He looked haunted. He looked like a man carrying an impossible weight. "They're remarkable," he said without turning. "You've raised them well. I've done my best. In hiding, in fear, because of what my wife did to you." He turned then, and his expression was fierce. "She will pay for this, Seren. Every moment of suffering she caused you, every day you spent running, every year I lost with my children. She will answer for all of it." "And how will you accomplish that?" Seren settled into a chair by the fire, suddenly weary. "She's your queen, bound to you by ceremony. The laws of Valdoria don't allow for setting aside a royal union. Laws can change. Can they?" She met his gaze steadily. "Your ancestors created those laws specifically to prevent kings from discarding inconvenient wives. The nobility would revolt if you tried to alter them for personal reasons." Theron's jaw tightened. "There must be a way. I won't remain bound to her. Not now that I know the truth." "What truth?" "The word of a woman who disappeared 3 years ago and conveniently returned with 2 children?" Seren shook her head. "Cassia will deny everything. She'll claim I seduced you in an attempt to advance my position that I ran when she exposed my schemes, that the children belong to some unknown lover. Who do you think the court will believe? Their anointed queen? Or the bastard daughter who was always jealous of her legitimate sister?" The fire crackled between them. Theron's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "You speak as if you've thought about this before," he said finally. "Every night for 3 years," Seren admitted. "Every possible scenario, every way this could unfold. That's why I stayed hidden. Because the moment I revealed myself, the moment you found us, everything would become more complicated, more dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Seren looked toward the door behind which her children slept. "Cassia hasn't produced an heir," she said quietly. 3 years of marriage and no children. The whispers have already started, haven't they? Questions about whether the queen is barren, whether the succession is at risk. Theron nodded slowly. "Ash and Ren are your only children, your only heirs." Seren's voice hardened. "What do you think Cassia will do when she learns they exist? When she realizes her position depends on keeping them from ever being acknowledged?" The color drained from Theron's face. "She would never. She drugged me and stole my identity to marry you. She told the entire kingdom I was a faithless whore. Can she have spent 3 years enjoying power and privilege that should have been mine?" Seren's hands trembled with fury she could barely contain. "Do not tell me what Cassia would never do. You don't know her. You've never known her. But I grew up with her cruelty. I know exactly how far she's willing to go." Silence stretched between them, thick with implications neither wanted to voice. "Then we must be careful," Theron said at last, strategic. "I won't let her harm our children." "How?" "The moment you return to the palace with 2 previously unknown heirs, she'll know. She'll start plotting. And we both know she has allies at court. People who benefit from her position, who would happily help her eliminate threats to her power. Then I won't return with them." Theron moved closer, dropping to his knees before her chair. This close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the weariness carved into every feature. "I'll establish protection here. Guards, wards, whatever it takes to keep them safe while I deal with Cassia." "And me?" The question emerged before Seren could stop it. Theron reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed against her cheek, tracing the curve of her jaw with heartbreaking gentleness. "You belong at my side," he said. "You always have. I was a fool not to see the deception before the ceremony, not to realize the woman I was binding myself to wasn't the one I loved." Seren's breath caught. "You loved me?" From the first night you stumbled into my library." His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. "From the first time you spoke to me like a person instead of a king. You saw me, Iseren, the real me, not the crown, not the power, just the man. Do you have any idea how rare that is? You never said. I was afraid." The admission seemed to cost him something. Afraid of what it meant, afraid of what it would require of me. Kings don't marry bastard daughters. Kings don't follow their hearts. I convinced myself there would be time to figure it out. That after the ceremony, I would find a way to make it work. And then, I disappeared. "And then you disappeared," he echoed. "And I realized that every fear, every obstacle I'd imagined, none of it mattered. Not compared to losing you." Seren wanted to believe him. Every part of her ached to believe him. But 3 years of pain couldn't be erased with pretty words, no matter how sincere. "You're still married to my sister," she said quietly. "A marriage built on lies and deception. It doesn't matter how it was built. It exists." She pulled back from his touch, needing the distance to think clearly. "And until it doesn't, until Cassia is exposed and removed, there can be nothing between us. Not again." Theron's hand dropped to his side. The rejection landed visibly, but he didn't argue. "I understand," he said. "I'll earn back your trust, Seren. However long it takes, whatever I must do. I will prove to you that I'm worthy of the chance you once gave me." Before she could respond, something shifted in the air. A coldness that hadn't been there before, seeping through the cottage walls like winter mist. Theron shuddered. Seren frowned. "Are you all right?" "Fine." But his voice was strained, and she noticed for the first time how pale he'd become. "Just tired from the journey." It was a lie. She knew it immediately. The same instinct that had always allowed her to read him, to see beneath the mask he wore for everyone else, now screamed that something was deeply wrong. "Theron." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I should let you rest. We'll talk more in the morning. Make plans. I'll find a way to fix this, Seren. I swear it." He rose, and she saw his hand tremble as he reached for the door. The cold seemed to follow him, radiating from his body like a winter storm contained in human flesh. "Wait." Seren stood, catching his arm. His skin was ice beneath her fingers, far colder than any shifter should ever be. "Something is wrong with you. Tell me." Theron went very still. "It's nothing you need to worry about. Don't lie to me, not now. Not after everything we've just said." For a long moment he didn't respond. Then slowly he turned to face her. The mask was gone. Beneath it was exhaustion so profound it seemed carved into his bones. And something else. Fear. "There's a curse," he said quietly, "on the kings of Valdoria. It's been in my bloodline for generations." Seren's blood turned to ice. "What kind of curse?" Theron's smile was bitter, broken. "The kind," he said, "that's slowly killing me." The curse had a name. Theron told her as they sat by the dying fire, his voice hollow, his skin still carrying that unnatural chill. "The severance," he said. "It's been in my bloodline for 8 generations. A punishment inflicted on my ancestor by a scorned witch." Seren pulled a blanket from the chair and wrapped it around his shoulders. He didn't resist, and which frightened her more than anything else. The Alpha King she remembered would never have accepted such coddling. "What does it do?" she asked quietly. Theron stared into the embers. When a king of Valdoria is bound by ceremony to someone who is not his true mate, his life force begins to drain. Slowly at first, then faster. He laughed bitterly. "My ancestors learned to avoid it by never forming deep attachments, by choosing political marriages with women they felt nothing for. As long as there was no true mate to be separated from, the curse remained dormant." "But you had a true mate." "I did." His eyes found hers, filled with grief. "I do. and I bound myself to another woman instead. Seren's chest constricted. You didn't know. Cassia deceived you. The curse doesn't care about intentions. It only knows that I stand beside the wrong woman while the right one exists somewhere in the world. He lifted his hand, and even in the dim light, Seren could see the frost creeping across his knuckles. For 3 years it's been feeding on me, getting stronger. When I finally found you tonight, felt you near me again. He shuddered. It's like the curse realized what it was missing. What I was missing. There must be a cure. There is. Theron's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The bond must be completed. The true mate must be claimed properly, by ceremony and by blood. Only then will the curse release its hold. Then we complete it. I'm still married to Cassia. The words fell like stones. The curse requires a legitimate bond. As long as my marriage to her stands, I cannot bind myself to you. And I cannot dissolve the marriage without exposing her crimes, which I cannot prove without witnesses who would never speak against the queen. Seren felt the trap closing around them. Cassia had planned this perfectly. Even if Theron found his true mate, even if he discovered the deception, he would be powerless to act. The curse would kill him while his false queen watched. How long? Seren asked. How long do you have? Theron didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was barely audible. Weeks, perhaps. Maybe less, now that I've found you. The curse knows its grip is threatened. It will fight to finish what it started. Seren wanted to scream, wanted to rage against the unfairness of it all. 3 years of separation, 3 years of believing he had betrayed her. And now that she finally knew the truth, she was going to lose him anyway. There has to be another way, she said fiercely. Your ancestors, the ones who survived, how did they manage? They never found their true mates. Or they found them after the curse had already been satisfied by the deaths of previous queens. Theron's smile was ghastly. I could wait for Cassia to die naturally, but I suspect I'll be long gone before that happens. What if she didn't die naturally? The words hung in the air between them. Seren hadn't meant to say them, but she didn't take them back. Theron's gaze sharpened. I cannot murder my queen, Seren, no matter what she's done. The kingdom would never accept a king who killed his wife. I'm not suggesting murder. I'm suggesting justice. Seren leaned forward. You said you couldn't prove her crimes. But what if you could? What if there were witnesses willing to speak? Who would dare? Cassia has spent 3 years consolidating power, placing her allies in every position of influence. Anyone who opposed her has been quietly removed. What about her own words? Seren pressed. What if she could be goaded into confessing publicly? Before Theron could respond, the door burst open. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it a scent that made Seren's wolf snarl with instant recognition. Behind her, she heard the children's bedroom door creak, heard Ash's worried voice calling out. Cassia stood in the doorway. She was flanked by 4 armed guards, her golden hair gleaming in the firelight, her face twisted with fury. She looked older than Seren remembered, harder, the softness of youth replaced by something calculating and cruel. Well, Cassia breathed. Isn't this touching? The king reunited with his little whore. Theron struggled to his feet, placing himself between Cassia and Seren. But he swayed, his strength failing, and Seren had to catch his arm to keep him from falling. Cassia's eyes narrowed at the gesture, then her gaze moved past them both, landing on the 2 small figures now standing in the bedroom doorway. Everything about her went still. Children, she said slowly. 2 of them. With those eyes. Her voice rose to something shrill. You bore him heirs, you miserable, conniving little... Careful, sister. Seren's voice was ice. You're speaking to the mother of the future rulers of Valdoria. They are bastards, illegitimate. They have no claim. They have every claim. Theron's voice was weak, but certain. They are my blood. My heirs. And you are nothing but a fraud who deceived her way onto my throne. Cassia's face contorted with rage. I am your queen. I was chosen before the entire kingdom. You cannot. You were not chosen? You stole the place of the woman I actually wanted. Theron's hand found Seren's, gripping it tightly. You drugged your sister. Mimicked her scent. Answered to her name. Everything about our marriage was built on lies. You have no proof of that. I have her. Theron gestured to Seren. The woman who was actually supposed to stand before me that night. The woman whose children carry my bloodline. The woman I have spent 3 years searching for. The word of a bitter bastard who couldn't accept her place. Cassia's smile was vicious. Who will the court believe? Their anointed queen, he or a jealous half-sister who ran away in shame? They'll believe me, a new voice said. Everyone turned. A woman stood in the doorway behind Cassia's guards, wrapped in a traveling cloak. She was elderly, her face weathered by years, but her eyes were sharp and clear. Seren recognized her instantly. Marin, the midwife who had attended her birth. The woman who had been present when her mother died. I was there, Marin said, stepping forward. 22 years ago, when Lord Harwin's mistress gave birth. And I was there 3 years ago, when Lady Cassia came to me seeking a particular kind of potion. Cassia's face went white. You lying old hag! A potion to mimic another's scent, Marin continued calmly. She told me it was for a masquerade. I didn't think much of it at the time. But when the true Seren disappeared and the false one took her place, I began to wonder. This proves nothing. It proves enough. Marin reached into her cloak and withdrew a small vial. I kept a sample of the potion. It can be tested, analyzed. The ingredients are distinctive, and I kept records of who purchased them. Cassia's composure finally cracked. She lunged toward Marin, but her guards hesitated, confused about whose orders to follow. Seize her, Cassia screamed. Seize all of them. The children, the whore, the king, all of them. I am your queen. I command you. The guards didn't move. The king is your liege lord, one of them said quietly. We follow his commands, not yours. Especially when you've just admitted to treason. Cassia froze. I admitted nothing. You demanded we seize the king himself. The guard's hand moved to his sword. That's enough. No. Cassia backed toward the door, her eyes wild. You can't do this. I am queen. She stumbled over the threshold and fell. When she rose, there was a knife in her hand, pulled from somewhere in her sleeve. She didn't aim for the guards or for Theron. She aimed for the children. If I can't have heirs, Cassia snarled, neither can you. She lunged. Seren didn't think. She moved on pure instinct, throwing herself between her children and the blade. She felt the knife slice across her arm, felt hot blood spill down her wrist, felt something else surge up from deep inside her. Light. It exploded from her palms, silver and brilliant, filling the cottage with radiance so bright that everyone recoiled. Cassia screamed, and the knife falling from her hands as she collapsed to her knees, and Seren stood in the center of it all, power flowing through her veins like liquid moonlight, ancient and wild and utterly overwhelming. Moon blessed, Marin breathed from the doorway. Just like your mother. The light faded slowly, leaving Seren trembling, her wounded arm forgotten. She looked at her hands, still faintly glowing, and felt the truth settle into her bones. Her mother hadn't been an ordinary servant. She had been something far rarer. And she had passed that gift to her daughter. You can save him, Marin said quietly. The king, the curse that's killing him. Your light can break it. Seren looked at Theron, who had collapsed against the wall, frost spreading rapidly across his chest. His breathing was shallow, his eyes barely open. She looked at her children, huddled together behind her, safe but terrified. She looked at her sister, crumpled on the floor, finally defeated. and she made her choice. The guards bound Cassia's hands while Seren knelt beside Theron. He was barely conscious, his skin pale as snow, his lips tinged with blue. The curse had sensed its opportunity when Cassia made her move. It was trying to finish him before Seren could intervene. "Tell me what to do," Seren said to Marin, quickly. The old midwife knelt beside her. "The Moon Blessed can forge bonds that transcend ordinary ceremony. Your mother could have done it, had she lived. You must reach into him, find the corruption where the false bond sits, and burn it away. Then replace it with truth." "How?" "You'll know." Marin placed a weathered hand over Seren's heart. "The power answers to love, child. It always has." Seren took a shaking breath. She placed both hands on Theron's chest, feeling the ice beneath his skin. The wrongness coiled around his heart like a serpent. She closed her eyes and reached. The curse fought her immediately. It was old, vicious, and desperate to survive. It showed her visions of failure, of Theron dying in her arms, of her children growing up without a father. It whispered that she was too weak, too untrained, and too late. But beneath the curse, she found him. The real him. The man who had laughed in a darkened library. The man who had held her like she was precious. The man who had searched for 3 years because losing her had broken something inside him. She wrapped her light around that essence and pulled. The curse screamed. She felt it tearing at her, clawing, eye biting. Her arm where Cassia had cut her burned like fire. Blood dripped from her nose, her ears. Somewhere far away she heard Ren crying, heard Ash calling her name. But she didn't stop. She found the false bond, the twisted connection that linked Theron to Cassia, and she burned it. Poured every ounce of her newfound power into destroying the lie that was killing the man she loved. And when the false bond finally shattered, she replaced it with truth. Her truth. Her love. Her claim on him. 3 years delayed but never diminished. Mine. Her soul sang into his. My mate. My king. Mine. Yours. His soul answered back. Always yours. Only yours. The light exploded outward one final time, then faded. Seren collapsed against Theron's chest, utterly spent. But beneath her ear she heard something beautiful. His heart. Beating strong and steady. Warm. Seren. His voice was rough but clear. His hand came up to stroke her hair. Seren, look at me. She raised her head. His eyes were open, clear of fog and frost. Color had returned to his cheeks. When he smiled, it was the smile she remembered from those stolen nights, warm and real and full of wonder. You saved me, he said. You found me first, she whispered back. He pulled her down and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Around them, she heard Ren squeal with delight, heard Ash's quiet, finally, heard Marin's satisfied chuckle, and in the corner, bound and broken, Cassia wept. They returned to Valdoria 3 weeks later. The journey was nothing like Seren's desperate flight years before. This time she traveled in a royal carriage, her children beside her, neither father riding at the head of a procession that stretched back 1/2 mile. Word had already spread. Messengers had raced ahead carrying the truth. Cassia's confession extracted before witnesses. Maren's testimony supported by her records. The guards' accounts of the Queen's attempted murder of the royal heirs. By the time they reached the capital, the people were already lining the streets. Not to jeer, not to question, to celebrate. The true Queen! Someone shouted as Seren's carriage passed. The true Queen has returned! The cry was taken up, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Seren sat frozen, overwhelmed, as thousands of voices chanted her name. Mama, Ren tugged at her sleeve. They're happy to see us. They are, little one, Seren's voice caught. They really are. The coronation took place at midsummer. Cassia had been tried and found guilty of fraud, attempted murder, and treason. The penalty was death, But Theron had offered an alternative: exile to a remote island at the edge of the known world, stripped of title, lands, and name, forbidden to ever return to Valdoria on pain of execution. Seren had agreed to the mercy, not for Cassia's sake, but for her own. She didn't want her children's earliest memories stained by their aunt's blood. Lord Harwin had faced justice too. His crimes against Seren's mother had been exposed during Cassia's trial, the truth of his cruelty laid bare for all to see. He rotted now in the same dungeons that had once held political prisoners, awaiting a trial that would strip him of everything. Seren had visited him once, just once. "You were wrong about me," she had said through the bars. "Wrong about my mother. Wrong about everything." He hadn't answered. He'd just stared at her with eyes full of hatred, the same hatred she'd endured her entire childhood. She'd walked away without looking back. The crown was heavier than Seren expected. She knelt before the altar in the great cathedral, the same cathedral where Cassia had stolen her place 3 years before. But today, there was no deception, no drugs, no lies. Today, she was seen. Theron lifted the crown from its velvet cushion. It gleamed silver and gold, set with moonstones that caught the light streaming through the stained glass windows. "Seren of Valdoria," he announced, his voice carrying through the vast space. "My true mate, mother of my heirs, the woman I should have married from the beginning." He placed the crown on her head. "Rise, my queen." Seren rose. The cathedral erupted. Lords and ladies who had once ignored her, nobles who had whispered about the bastard daughter, servants who had pitied her in secret, all of them now bowed as she turned to face them. But her eyes found only 3 figures in the front row. Ash stood solemnly in his new formal clothes, trying very hard to look princely and not fidget. Ren had already abandoned decorum and was waving frantically, bouncing on her toes. Marin watched with tears streaming down her weathered face, the woman who had helped bring both Seren and her children into the world, who had carried the truth for years waiting for the moment it could finally be spoken. Behind them sat others who had come forward during the trial. Palace servants who had witnessed Cassia's cruelty. Guards who had overheard damning conversations. A web of testimony that had sealed the false queen's fate. Seren nodded to them all. They had chosen truth over fear, and that choice had helped set her free. Later, at the feast, Seren slipped away from the noise and celebration. She found a quiet balcony overlooking the gardens, breathing in the cool night air. Footsteps approached behind her. She knew who it was without turning. "Escaping your own coronation?" Theron asked, settling beside her at the railing. "Just taking a moment." She leaned into him when his arm came around her. "It's a lot to process." "The crown? The title? The several thousand people who now answer to you? All of that. And the fact that 3 years ago, I was hiding in a forgotten village, convinced I'd spend the rest of my life running." Theron pressed a kiss to her temple. You'll never have to run again." "I know." She turned in his arms, looking up at the face she had loved for so long, in darkness and in light. "I'm still not sure I deserve any of this." "You deserve everything." His voice was fierce. "Every crown, every title, every moment of happiness. You saved my life, Seren. You raised our children alone for 3 years. You survived things that would have broken anyone else." "I survived because I had them." She glanced back toward the great hall, where she could hear Ren's distinctive laugh rising above the noise. "They gave me a reason to keep going. And now we go forward together." Theron cupped her face in his hands, warming her cheeks with his touch. No more frost. No more cold. The curse was truly gone. You, me, Ash, Ren, our family. "Our family," Seren repeated softly. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and she felt the mate bond singing between them, complete and unbreakable. They had found each other through lies and betrayal, through years of separation and a curse that should have killed him. They had earned this moment with blood and tears and stubborn, relentless love. "Mama! Papa!" Ren's voice carried from the doorway. "You're missing the cake. They won't cut it without you." Seren laughed against Theron's lips. "Duty calls." "It always will." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "But we'll answer it together." They walked back into the light, back to their children, back to the celebration of everything they had fought to build. Behind them, the moon rose full and silver over Valdoria, blessing the new queen with the same light that had saved her king. Years later, when historians wrote about the reign of King Theron and Queen Seren, they would note the prosperity, the reforms, and the unprecedented era of peace. But the bards told a different story. They sang of a king who searched 3 years for his lost love, of a mother who raised her children in shadows to keep them safe, of a curse broken by the power of a moon-blessed heart, of 2 people who found their way back to each other against impossible odds. They sang of a mating ceremony where the wrong sister was chosen, and they sang of everything that came after. Crown Prince Ash grew into a thoughtful, measured ruler, his pale gray gaze carrying the weight of his father's wisdom. Princess Ren remained wild and fierce, eventually becoming the first female general in Valdoria's history. And their parents? Their parents never stopped loving each other. Through political challenges and raising headstrong children, through quiet evenings and grand celebrations, through every sunrise and every moonrise for the rest of their days. Theron had once vowed he would never let Seren run again. She never did. She had finally found the one place in all the world where she truly belonged. Home. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more tales of love, magic, and second chances, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Seren and Theron's journey. Did you see the twist with Cassia coming? Who was your favorite character? Your comments mean more than you know. I read every single one. Until next time.